Hi, welcome to my podcast, Reclaim. I am your host, Thaís Sky. I have supported women navigate the complexities of being human for over 10 years. This podcast is where I disseminate some of those learnings and offer thoughts and guests to guide you into your healing. Welcome. Hey, Sky here. Okay, so part one of this series was recorded last week where I talked about disappointment and expectations. And then I asked you all on Instagram to tell me, what are you struggling with when it comes to disappointment and expectations? And you all came through. I got so many wonderful struggles, commentaries, ideas, thoughts of what you would like to hear for this part two. I love it. I'm here for it. I often do better when I am receiving direct feedback from you all. So thank you for all of you who answered this question on my Instagram stories. If you're not on Instagram, or if you're not following me on Instagram, come join me there at I am Thaís Sky. I really love that platform. It's a great way to connect with you all. It's not the perfect way, but it's a great way to connect with you all, to share my writings, and to get your thoughts on episodes like the one I shared last week. If you are tuning in for the first time, I really do recommend you checking out that episode first, because this will be a building off of that episode. And I think it may be helpful for you to hear that episode first and then dive into this episode. So we're going to be talking about the initial prompting was that I want to talk about why we have such high expectations of other people. And then I asked if that would be helpful and what else would be helpful. And I got an incredible list. So I would love for this to be a more organized kind of workshop-y feel type podcast episode. But unfortunately, time is not on my side. I have so much going on this week. So what I'm going to do is I am just going to weave in a conversation with you all. And I hope that this makes sense. And I hope that it lands for you. Just allow yourself to kind of get immersed in the world of disappointment and expectations. And let's see if we can address some of these really valid struggles that you all have. I want to start with one of the theories that why we have high expectations of other people. And I think from there, everything else will kind of come into place. Because for many of us, we recognize that we really expect a lot from people, that we put them on this pedestal of how they will treat us and treat other people, that we really expect a lot from people. And even though we continually get disappointed and then we get affirmed that people are human and we can't trust people, we continue to do this. We continue to run this pattern. We go into this new environment and we're like, this is the environment where I can finally have high expectations and have those expectations be met. But then inevitably the person will be imperfect. And because the desire was for them to not be perfect, the fact that they are imperfect devastates us. And we are affirmed, oh, right, I can't really trust anybody. It's so funny, my doggie is rolling a treat ball outside of the room that I'm in. And maybe you can hear that in the background. He's so cute. Okay, so let's talk about one possibility of why we may have high expectations of others. This is something that I navigate. I mentioned in the last episode that I started working at a new mental health clinic, and I had a lot of expectations that this clinic was going to be different than the previous clinic I was in. And I am one of those people who is chronically disappointed, and yet continually hope and expect that others will finally be who I need them and want them to be in order for me to feel safe in the world. This pattern is actually a very old pattern that probably stems from something very old. Usually when things are very stubborn, right? When we're noticing the same patterns happening over and over and over again, we keep having high expectations, we keep being disappointed, we keep doing the same thing. And no matter what we do, it kind of just keeps being a part of our lives. it's probably because it was something that happened when we were very little. It's very imprinted in our mind. That's why there's some patterns that are easier to break than others. Some pattern, it's just a matter of setting a new routine, setting up new habits, turning on that alarm, putting your sneakers right next to the door, like these kind of like hacks that will help create new habits of success. The reason why some of those are much easier than others typically has to do with our stories around those habits, which typically have to do with the way we were imprinted early on. And that's where I exist. That's where the work that I do lands in, is like these ancient stories. I'm not interested in setting up habits for success. Like there's like 1,000 million jillion books on like how to make yourself happier. Do you like my little voice that I'm doing there? There's so many places that you can go for that. Love that. Some of them work for me, some of them don't. That's all fine and dandy. My work doesn't reside in these temporary, kind of high level work. Again, not saying that that's bad or wrong, just saying that that's not where my zone of genius is. My zone of genius is underneath the surface. Like, let's explore the patterns that are very stubborn and really try to understand them and really understand what purpose it's playing. And so when we're talking about the chronic disappointment of having high expectations on other people and then being let down, you got to ask yourself, like, how is this pattern serving me? Like, what is it serving? How is it protecting me? How is it helping me in a really convoluted way that probably doesn't feel very helpful anymore? What was that basic function? And here's what I think it is for many of us. Not all of us. This is just one theory. But when we are young, when we're babies, like really young, babies, toddlers, little children, it's very normal for us to have expectations of our caregivers giving us our basic needs. And in fact, that expectation is actually relationshiping, right? To have a relationship with a caregiver where you cry, they attune to that cry, they know what that cry means, and then they offer that, whatever it is that need is back to you. That is how we learn so much about ourselves, about needs, about our template for relating. Everything that's really good and juicy lies within these initial relationship with our caregivers. And so having basic trust that we will get our needs met, and that teaches us then to trust that we can get our own needs met. It first starts with others. It starts by other people being trustworthy around us, being attuned to us, mirroring us, communicating to us, teaching us, in order for us to then bring that inward and cultivate self-trust and learn about our essential goodness, and be able to have kind of these relationships with people and be able to relate to people. You may have heard of this as secure attachment and attachment theory, which has become very, very popular. Gotta love good old attachment theory. So secure attachment. I feel like I'm speaking way too fast. I had a friend. Her name's Christine. She works in PR. She listened to my podcast, and she works with celebrities. She's very, very cool and famous in my mind. And she listened to my podcast. I love her so much. She was like, Thaís, your podcast is so good, but you talk so fast, which is wild, right? As an immigrant, why I talk so fast. Okay, so let's back up. These initial templates of how we learn how to relate to each other. We learn that our needs will be met. We learn about our emotions, our internal world. All of that comes through relationship. And when we can really trust that the other person is curious about us, that they can tend to us, we call that secure attachment. Now, secure attachment means a lot of things. There's a lot of different definitions. We're not getting into the whole attachment theory here. Just wanting to name that what happens in that security is that we develop security within ourselves. And when we can develop this security within ourselves and within our relationships, what happens is expectation actually changes to just relationshiping. And we can kind of navigate being in relationship and being in a give and take together. But if that didn't quite form, if we didn't quite get our needs met, what may have happened is we learned that we were going to be let down, that our needs were not going to be met. Now, you may have heard of this idea of repetition compulsion. It is as old as Freud. Freud is the one that initially conceptualized this idea of repetition compulsion, which is that we have a compulsion to repeat familiar dynamics for a multitude of reasons, one of which is to master it. And you may have heard of this phrase, which is mastering the trauma, which is we're going to set up the same dynamics in our childhood that we chronically did not get our needs met, but this time we're going to finally master it. This time we're going to finally get it. The repetition compulsion comes from the sense of if we have a template for how we see our relationships, and so everything fits into that template. And then we find ourselves in similar dynamics. Okay, repetition, compulsion, mastering trauma, they all mean slightly different things, but we get the general idea of them, right? Okay, so then what happens? So if we were disappointed as children by expectations that were very basic for what was needed for us to thrive, what we may find now is that we relate to others in the same way, where we put high expectations on people because we hope that maybe this time we'll be able to get our needs met. We'll be able to get the love that we require. And then when inevitably they are human, because in our template, to be human means to be so misattuned that it comes at a harm, at a cost to us. Now, as adults, when somebody lets us down, when they are human, it becomes a huge internal devastation that goes beyond just what is happening. It goes beyond our friend not calling us, and it goes into a real desire that that friend would heal this part of ourselves so that we could now finally be satisfied. We have this deep hole within us where we want other people to finally meet our expectations so that that hole can be filled. The problem is no one in our lives right now is meant to fill that hole, because that hole cannot be filled by people. It can now only really be filled by our own attunement and meeting our own needs. And it can be helped by people around us. Don't get me wrong. I'm all about relational work. So much of how we learn to fill that hole is by now surrounding ourselves with people who can meet our needs. But while we hold people to this impossible standard that they not be human, it's a sign that we're not actually relating to them as humans. We're relating to them as a fantasy, a desire of who we wish they would be. If we really related to somebody like they were human, we would be okay with them messing up or being disappointed, hurting us. I mean, it would suck and we wouldn't feel good, but it wouldn't cause the extreme devastation that it sometimes causes when we expect people to be perfect, because it's not them that we're expecting to be perfect. It's we want them to heal something that's not theirs to heal. So this is one way that we can be thinking about why we have high expectations for other people. It's the pattern. We expect them to be perfect. They let us down. Now we are affirmed. See, I knew I couldn't depend on people. I knew I have to do this alone. I have to be alone in this. And so then we find ourselves withdrawn or not, depending on people until the next situation arises where it's like, are you my mommy? Right? Like, are you going to be perfectly attuned to me? Are you going to finally meet all my needs? And then again, we put all of that expectation on them. So the answer that most of us come to in this work, right, when we're doing self-help or whatever, is then don't expect anything from people. But you'll notice that if you don't expect anything from people, you're not actually tending to this pattern. You're trying to prevent yourself from stepping into this pattern. And that's not going to work. We can't contort our lives in such a way that we never get activated or never get hurt or that's just not how it works. We have to learn what is the underlying desire that is propelling this pattern. That's the work, is to not get distracted by the pattern, not get distracted by the actual circumstance, but to actually allow that circumstance to take you deeper within yourself. I expect my boss to finally be the mother I never had. My boss will not be that mother because the fantasy of that mother is perfection. And my boss is actually imperfect. There was this one time, I'll make an example. There's this one time where she didn't stand up for me in a group, and it felt mortifying. And I believe because I was bullied as a child, again, this is all made up, I'm just making up a story here. Because I was bullied as a child, that the mother's responsibility is to protect me. My boss didn't protect me. I had this high expectation that she'll be able to prevent me from being hurt. And now I have to deal with the consequences. Now I'm devastated at my boss and I want to quit. Okay, so in that story, we can first really be with the disappointment, the mortification, the shame, the embarrassment, the resentment, all of these really valid feelings about our boss. And then we can slow it down and really think about what it is that we're really longing for, that we're really longing for a mother we never had, that we never got that protection that was so important for us to experience as a child. And so now we're expecting our boss to be perfect when it's really the fantasy of the mother that is perfect. And your boss will not be that. So we have to take a step back. We have to process the grief and the loss of the mother we never had. And we have to then come to terms with what it means if we allow our boss to be human. And that means that our boss is probably going to hurt us. So how can we support ourselves, protect ourselves? How can we set ourselves up so that whatever happens, we can have our own back? Okay? So that's a high level understanding of why we may be doing this. It's very tantalizing to get stuck. Well, it's about my boss, but it's not really, is it? Because if it was just about your boss, then you could have a conversation with her and so much of your mind would be eased. But the fact of the matter is, it's probably not about your boss. It's about a chronic pattern of feeling like people let you down, and then you put high expectations on people and then they let you down. So then a question I got that I think is a really great question to piggyback off of this is, well, how do we identify what realistic expectations are for people? And they specify that aren't my family. So the boss story is a perfect one of like, okay, so what is a realistic expectation for people around you? Gosh, that's such a good question. And I think what we're now getting to is relational dynamics. Like now what we're getting into is, how do we want to be treated by our boss? How do we want to be treated by our colleagues? How do we want to be treated? What type of cultural environment do we want that would feel really supportive for us? And those are questions to be had. Like, I want to be treated with respect. I want to be treated with as if my work matters, etc. And then wherever you feel like you're not being treated that way, wherever you're feeling like you're not being treated with respect or your work doesn't matter, again, there's the inquiry of, do I need to have a conversation with someone about this? Do I need to tend this within myself? Do I need to go to my therapist, coach, healer, teacher, etc., and process this? Like, what level of support do I need to make sense of this? Because we don't have to make sense of all these things by ourselves. I mean, gosh, so much of the healing work that I see other people write about is like, we have to make sense of all of this totally in our own heads. We have to understand what's happening completely within our own minds. But our minds are not based on reality. They're based on our own subjective experience of reality. So there's a limitation to how much of what's happening that we can process by ourselves. So if you're noticing yourself being continually, chronically let down, it's not that your expectations aren't realistic. It's that you need to be asking yourself, am I getting it from the right people? Is there a part of me that this feels familiar? Does it feel familiar for me to be chronically let down? I wonder why that is. A big one, right, is dating. We think that, if that we have high expectations for dating, and then we'll get told that it's impossible for us to meet somebody because we have so many check boxes that we need to have met. Most of the times that I see that, these high expectations, what I'm seeing is a defense, is like a barrier. Unless this other person is exactly how I need them and want them to be, I can't be in relationship with them. Oftentimes, that's an intimacy issue. It's a way that we're afraid to get close to somebody because we're afraid that if we open up, then we'll be vulnerable, then we'll be let down, etc., etc. And so we really need to be, again, thinking about, I don't know, instead of thinking about whether the expectation is realistic or not, or whether it's high expectations or low expectations, that's all subjective. What is realistic to one person may be unrealistic to another. I would rather, I think, orient the conversation towards, is this sustainable and doable in the relationship that I am in? So I expect that, my partner listens to me every time I share a problem. And, let's say one instance, he doesn't listen to me. And then I have to think about how I want to respond. Do I want to share that? Do I want to have a conversation? Do I want to understand the situation that maybe he was busy or preoccupied? It's less about how realistic is the expectation and more about what is underneath the expectation. What's the need that's being met or not met, and what needs to happen to get that need met. Oftentimes, unrealistic expectations or really high demanding expectations of self or other comes out of fear. And so again, instead of thinking about the expectation, it's more useful maybe to think about the fear. What is the fear? What is the hope? What is you hoping would happen? Sometimes we idealize the outcome, once this person is perfect or once I'm perfect, then everything will be okay. But the truth of the matter is we have seen again and again that no matter how perfect we try to be or other people try to be, things will never be the way we envision them being, because life is a lot more messier than that. And that directly leads into another comment that I got here, which is perfectionism equals unattainable expectations for me and myself. And I love that connection to perfectionism. I've talked about perfectionism a lot before on the podcast because perfectionism is, in the way I see it, is like a state of being. It's a way of seeing the world where we believe that in our perfection, we are whole. And usually that stems from, there are many reasons why this stems from, there are many complicated dynamics for how we develop perfectionism. One example could be that we grew up in an environment where we had a younger sibling who was the problem child, yeah? And this younger sibling had an alcohol problem, an eating disorder, sex addiction, cut herself, let's just say, had all of that going on. And so we learned that you getting in trouble isn't going to get as much attention as your sibling. And so maybe the way that you learn how to get attention is to be perfect and neat and contained and small. And if you, and a people pleaser, right? If you are just perfect, then maybe that's the role that you get to play and that you'll then get the attention that you want. So perfectionism is often a role. It's a small, narrow sliver of all of the complexities of who we are. And what's painful about perfectionism is that, it comes with these unattainable expectations. It comes with this hope. The fantasy is if we can be perfect, we will be loved. And we will do everything to be perfect. But the difficult thing about these unattainable expectations is that they often change. One day, your expectation is that you be perfect and kind. The next day is that you be perfect and stand up for yourself. The next day is that you be more aggressive. Right? The expectations change as situations change. And that's what makes them so unattainable and so painful, is that we're constantly caught up in this cycle of believing, if I could just be that perfect person, everything would be okay. And instead, what perfectionism does is it keeps us paralyzed, it keeps us stuck, and it keeps us really believing that there's something defective and wrong within us, because every time we take action from that perfectionistic place, we are encouraging and enforcing perfectionism. And yeah, that's really, really painful. And so rather than, again, focusing on the expectations, my invitation is to focus on the perfectionism and to focus on how you have learned to relate to others in a way that really values your wholeness, your perfectionism over relating and being messy in the relationship, because that's much harder. It's much harder to get tangled up in conversations about what I expect and what you expect and what I want and what you want and how we can make it work for the both of us. So much of expectations and managing expectations happens in conversation. But again, we're so caught up in having to make sense of everything by ourselves that then we just kind of operate in this individualistic kind of bubble where we have to make sense of everything, and then we have to know exactly how to respond to everybody, given very little clues, in hopes that that will assure that we are loved and taken care of. When really the joy, the magic happens when we can just be in relationship with other people and communicate and ask questions and understand what is going on for them. Okay, let's see what other comments I got here. I've told myself from a very early age to not expect anything to avoid disappointment. I hear that. Those of you who believe that really need to go back and listen to the part 1 of this, if that really lands for you, because that was all what was part 1 was about. Okay. I put people on a pedestal, and when they show me their humanness, I am disappointed. Yep, that happens. Why do we put people on a pedestal to begin with? There's so many reasons for this that we talked about, but also a desire to be saved, right? A desire to that somebody else will see our goodness in a way that we can't see it ourselves. And then when they show that they're human, you're disappointed. And the thing about disappointment is that it's okay to be disappointed. And sometimes that disappointment is exactly what's necessary in order for you to now be able to relate to the human in front of you instead of to the pedestal that you put them on. The painful part about putting people on pedestals is, or valuing them, idealizing them, is that inevitably will come the opposite of the devaluation or the realization of their humanity, to the point where now they're the worst things in the world, right? That's usually what that means when we recognize their humanity. Actually, we're not recognizing their humanity. We are putting them below humanity. We're saying, oh, they are then really bad and wrong and broken. And oftentimes this cycle can be really painful and is a source of tremendous inner turmoil. And we can start of protect ourselves from falling into the cycle by really recognizing and noticing why we're putting someone on that pedestal to begin with. And oftentimes it's important to ask ourselves, what are we thinking about ourselves when we're putting the other person on a pedestal? Because usually if they are valued, it means that we're devalued. They are better than us because they have something we don't have. And so accessing that inquiry and really thinking about our own self-worth and the worthiness and doing that work can help take people off of their pedestal. We often project onto others things that we can't really tolerate within ourselves for whatever multitude of reasons. It's not to say that it's all our fault. I'm just saying that projection is a defense. It's a way that we protect ourselves from accessing things. And so slowing down and developing the capacity to get curious as to what's happening internally is really, really important when we're talking about the ways in which we expect other people to be something that they're not. Okay, another question. What's too high of an expectation? I feel like I already touched upon that. If something about expectations is if it's rigid, if there's no flexibility in an expectation, there's no space for humanity in the expectation, it's probably, not that it's too high, but that rigidity is probably the sign that there's something else going on, that there is a fantasy, a projection, a desire for somebody to heal something within us. it's interesting because thinking about my own relationships and when I notice myself and catch myself having too high of expectation is oftentimes when I hope that somebody will prioritize me and give me more space in their lives than they're actually capable of giving. And then when I, really think about this more, I think about this and how like I don't feel like I got enough attention. I don't think that I got enough love and support. And now that plays out in me hoping that everybody else will be able to finally give me the love and support that I want. I'm making this super high level, but it's not now that it's too high of an expectation that people can be there for me. I mean, I'm sure there are people who could give me all the attention that I wanted. But they may not be the quality of people that I want, right? It's just so much more complicated than just having this expectation and hoping that this expectation will be met. But it's also very, very individualized and something to be talking about with each relationship of like, I'm noticing myself wanting more from you. Can you give more? Or is this your limit? And if this is their limit, can I be okay with not getting everything that I want from this person? All of this can be addressed through conversations. Expectations is not just an internal experience. It's an interpersonal experience. It's between two humans. The more we can communicate, the easier it is for us to navigate the relationship. Okay, let's see. The difference between disappointment I can move through versus non-negotiable. That's a great question. And I think that the only answer that I can give here is it really depends on what's a non-negotiable for you, and what's important for you. For example, if I'm in a monogamous relationship, so if my partner were to cheat on me, I have an expectation that he won't. If he does, I will be not only disappointed, but I'll also have so many other feelings about it. And right now, in my mind, it feels like a non-negotiable. It feels like something that like, if that happens, I don't know if I want to be in a relationship with that person. That's not to say I don't know what would happen if that were to actually happen. I don't know. But that feels like a pretty clear boundary to me, right? So I think getting clear on your values, getting clear on what's important to you, getting clear on your capacity to be with disappointment, giving yourself space to be with disappointment before deciding whether it's a non-negotiable or not may be really helpful. Now, to clarify, it's not that there are disappointments that you can't move through. You can move through any and all disappointment. But I think the question is asking, okay, once I move through a disappointment, what do I do with that information? What do I do with that disappointment? And, the first part may be helpful for you for that. And also think about if it's a chronic disappointment, if you're continually getting disappointed by people always around you, it's like part of your story, that's different than if you have one or a couple, like an instance of feeling disappointment. Chronic disappointment probably spells out more of a pattern. Acute disappointment probably speaks to a situation that communication and clarification and kind of coming together and making sense of it together may be really beneficial. And it would be wise to give yourself space to be with the disappointment before going into that conversation. Because oftentimes when we get really overwhelmed with a feeling like disappointment, it prevents us from accessing our capacity to be in conversation. We get so overwhelmed and dysregulated by the emotion. I tend to not have that many non-negotiables in my life. But now that I'm saying that, maybe it's just because they're so well known that it just doesn't happen around me. But I'm more inclined to think about each relationship separately and coming up with agreements and relating this with each relationship than painting broad brushstrokes with all my relationships. I don't believe in that kind of broad brushstrokey situation because each relationship is different and has different relational dynamics to it. Okay. I hope that was helpful. I hope all of this is helpful. I'm noticing right now that I'm 35 minutes in and I'm feeling like I'm rambling for some reason. Maybe that's my expectation right now of how you all are experiencing this. And now I get to be with my expectation and check in and see if is it true? And how do I know? And I don't actually know. The thing about expectations too is we're always going to feel justified in them, right? That's the danger about expectations, is that they are grounded in some type of reality. Too high expectations means what? Oh, I want people to always treat me well. That's kind of justified. We will always find ways to justify how our expectations is the right expectation, how our desires for how people treat us is the right way. And that's where it becomes dangerous, because wherever we have a righteousness or this justifiableness, which has an air of rigidity to it, we're missing something. We're defending against something. We're pushing something away. So notice that you may always feel justified. It's not about whether you can justify an expectation. It's about whether or not that expectation is creating a relationship that you feel good in and that the other person feels good in, that the two of you can meet. Okay, let's move on. Here's a good one. I often feel let down by others. I feel like I put in more effort into relationships than others do. And this coincides with another comment that I got, which is I often expect my boyfriend to be as empathic and affectionate as me, and he isn't. So there is something that we do, right? When we do things for others with the expectation that then they will do it to us, right? We show up in a certain way. We go above and beyond. We contort ourselves. We people please. We perfectionists. We do all of the things with the secret wish that if we do it, then we will get something back. That's not real relating. That's operating out of a complete mind fuckery that you've created for yourself. And it's non-consensual. The other person didn't agree to this. They didn't agree to the contract that you set up of if I am if I am affectionate, I will receive affection back. That's not relating. That's placing unspoken desires onto the other from your own ideas of how the relationship should be. If you're doing something hoping that it will get a reaction from another, we really have to think about better ways of communicating that. We have to be thinking about why we're doing what we're doing. We have to be thinking a little bit more about, is this manipulative? Is this heart-centered? Is there a better way that I can navigate this? If I go above and beyond for relationships and those relationships aren't doing it back to me, then I'm not really authentically giving in that relationship. I am giving to get something back. Now, to a certain extent, this is obviously completely fine. I am kind and courteous to you. I expect you to be kind and courteous to me. But when we're going to the point of going above and beyond and making cookies for someone when they're sick and getting them chicken noodle soup and doing all the things, and then when you get sick, they're not doing that back to you, well, then you really have to ask, why did you do it in the first place? Did you do it out of a desire to give, or was there expectations of receiving? And that's not fair. It's not fair for the other person because they didn't get permission. If you two had entered a contract of I'm going to make you cookies when you're sick and you're going to make cookies when I'm sick, that's different. But making somebody cookies and then expecting them to just know that that's what you want when you're sick, that's audacious, right? That's a mind fuckery. That's not relating. That is a lot of unspoken stuff that needs to be examined. And it's really, it can be really frustrating for the other person because it's oh, I didn't know that you were doing these things because you expected something from me. People have different ways of relating to each other. What I do for a friend because it's my way of loving somebody isn't the way that they may love me back. And so it's important for us to also be thinking about that. If we want something from someone, we need to communicate that. If we're not willing to communicate it, then there's my Chewy. Probably something else going on, right? That we need to get really, really clear about. Your boyfriend may not be empathic as affectionate as you, but your partner may do things that you don't do, like check your tire pressure or, I don't know, mow the lawn. I mean, I don't know. It's really, really important for us to be understanding why we're doing something. And if it's coming from a place where we are wanting the other person to do something back for us, we need to be cautious because that's manipulative. It's not fair. Okay, so you put more effort into relationships than other people do. What does that mean for you to put in effort? Are you the one that's always finding yourself reaching out to people? Is there a particular person that you feel like you do more reaching out to than they do? And are you open to saying something? Hey, I noticed that I'm doing more of the reaching out than you. And this has been a kind of a staple in our relationship. I wonder if we can talk about it. Maybe that person's just used to you being the one that always reaches out, and they know that they don't have to. Maybe they're going through a huge crisis in their life, and right now they're just not prioritizing the friendship. Maybe you are just naturally the leader, and you just naturally are the person who reaches out more, where they may naturally not be the leader. It may mean something about your relationship, or it may not, but you won't know unless you talk about it with them. You often feel let down by others because you are doing something more than people are asking for, because there isn't that communication going on about what they want and what you want. It's a very painful position to be in when we find ourselves being the ones that are the more thoughtful. And maybe you're just a thoughtful person. And maybe that's just how you relate to people. I'm so jealous of people who remember things about people. Like, I'll be in a conversation with two people, and Annie says that she has a birthday coming up, and then a couple weeks later, Tracy messages the three of us and is like, Annie, happy birthday. And I'm like, damn it, I wish I could remember Annie's birthday. Like, I wish I remembered Annie's birthday. Some people just have that natural ability to remember things, and I'm always envious of that. But that wouldn't be fair to say that they're more thoughtful than me, because I may show my thoughtfulness in other ways. And Annie may have expectations that we remembered her birthday because she said it so clearly, but she didn't communicate that. So now she sees that Tracy is the thoughtful one and the good friend, and I'm the not good friend. And then we need to talk about that. And maybe Annie needs to be with the disappointment that I'm not the perfect friend that she wanted me to be, that I'm not the person who remembers things. But I am the person that she can call to in the middle of the night, and I will be there within minutes to help her in whatever she needs. And maybe Tracy isn't that friend. Different relationships can have different dynamics, and it's important for us to be in communication about what each dynamic is in order for that relationship to thrive. Okay. We have a couple more comments that I want to get to, and then we'll wrap this episode up. The next thing, how to repair with the person when disappointment comes up. Whew. Yes, such a good question. Something that you can say. So first you process First you processed the disappointment. You came to terms with what it meant. You understood its implications, its underlying things, blah, 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 blah. And then after that introspection, you decided, in fact, it's time to have that conversation with somebody. So then you have to get all that courage up, especially those of us who don't like to have these types of difficult conversations because we're so accustomed to it becoming this complete rejection of our feelings. We go to the person and we say, hi, I have something I want to talk to you about. Are you open and available for that right now? They say yes. You say, I'm still processing I'm noticing, I don't know the exact language. You all decide the language, but I'm processing some disappointment from when you said that you were going to do something. I got my hopes up. I was very excited about it. And then you weren't able to do that thing. And I know that it had to do with your job and that you couldn't get out of it. But I'm just really disappointed. And I wanted just to be in that with you. Can we be in that disappointment together? I don't need you to fix it. I'm not trying to put this burden on you that you have to somehow now do better or tone. I just want to be in this with you. You could do something like that, or you can say, I'm noticing myself being really disappointed that this didn't happen or that you did this. And I guess I would love to talk to you about like, what was your experience of that like, and how are you feeling about it? And what's coming up for you about this? So these are all sample prompts for you to be thinking about how to engage relationally with the other person and be in your disappointment with them. It's really important before you go into the repair to be thinking about what it is that you want. Do you want them to take ownership of the disappointment? Do you want them to apologize? Do you want, like, what is it that you want? Most of the times what I want is to be witnessed, to be seen, to be heard. And so I then preface that all I really want is just for you to hear me and just to be in this with me. Because other people, particularly those that may not have the same emotional language or the tools, may not know how to listen to someone saying that they're disappointed in them and want to immediately go to fixing it. I mean, I'm just thinking about how often in childhood, kind of the threat was like, I'm not angry with you, I'm just disappointed. And like, that was such a bad thing that our parents were disappointed in us. We would much rather them yell and scream than be disappointed. And I think it's because disappointment is just one of those feelings that it's hard to fix, right? Like, it's kind of like a violation of trust. It's hard to just fix that overnight. It's hard to say, okay, well, this is, this is over and now we're going to be trusting each other again. This is over now, we're not going to be disappointed. Disappointed is its own thing and it can be heavy, but we're not trying to just make another person feel shitty. We're just saying, hey, I just want to be in this with you. Can you be in this with me? And see what happens. It's interesting. I'll sometimes post on Instagram prompts of things that we can say, and I'll get the comment of like, what? Like, you can say this to people? And it's like, yeah, everything that I share with you all, I have said, I have done in my relationships. And if you're wondering, like, how do I do that? My relationships can't listen to that. The way that starts is by first being able to listen to be able to tolerate people saying that to you, being able to tolerate people saying that they're disappointed in you. You know, we change our relationships by we change the ways we relate in relationships. And sometimes in that change, relationships will die that aren't going to be able to come with you. But more times than not, relationships can come with you. They're just going to need to get adjusted. And so if you want to have this repair with someone, when disappointment comes up, be knowledgeable of the relationship and what they can handle, and notice your expectations for the conversation. Just because you're trying this new thing doesn't mean they're suddenly going to get on board, right? You have to be thoughtful about what it is that we want from that conversation. But I love that you're using the language of how to repair. I love the words repair. I love thinking about relationships as a coming and a going, a getting closer and a pulling apart. And oftentimes expectations pull people apart, and communication and connection and being with each other's feelings are what pulls relationships together. Okay. Final thing I'm going to say on this. I can't believe I've already been talking for like 50 minutes. That is unreal. What happens when I keep taking my expectations so personally? And like, that's a whole other topic of like how to not take things so personally. A topic for a different day, because there's so much goodness there. But oftentimes, I will just say this, when we're taking something personally, we're actually not taking responsibility. We're not really reflecting on it. We're getting ego wounded. Our sense of being is being wounded. And usually when we take things personally, there's a lot of shame happening there. And we're totally destroying the self, right? Like, I'm so bad. I did that so wrong. Or I'm such to blame. Or it's all my fault. And so those types of self-defeating ideas don't help us understand what's happening and how to relate. So in order for us to not take things personally, we first have to really get clear and give ourselves space to process all the ways that we are taking things personally. What is it that feels so personal? What is the feelings that are here? The shame, the embarrassment, the frustration, whatever it is. Give space to that first, and then you'll have the clarity to know what to do about the expectation or the relationship. We take things personal because things are personal It's not about actually taking things personal. That's the problem. It's the fact that we really get engulfed in this sense of badness, and then we don't have the ability to kind of think through and feel through and process it. It gets stuck when we take things personally. So we have to get very intimate with that stuckness and all of the feelings that got evoked before we can go on and process what's going on. Okay. So those are just some of the comments I got. I am just so endlessly appreciative to all of you contributing to this conversation. I really hope that this was helpful. It would have been really nice for me to make this more like a workshop style, and have it be a little bit more organized. But like I said before, that's just not where things are in my life right now. So if you are disappointed by that, I understand that disappointment. And it is what it is. We can sit in that together. But if this conversation has been helpful for you, please let me know. I love hearing from you. You can share this. You can tag me at I am Thaís on Instagram. Private message me. I mean, I'm here for it. I'm sending you all of my love, and I'll catch you next week.